Good evening, gentlemen. Once more, let's get going on a small topic which will interest you, and this time I'm going to talk of India-America relations. America, as you know, is the world's biggest democracy. I would say area-wise, while population-wise, India is the biggest democracy. So both are supposed to be, should have been natural allies, but it hasn't happened that way all the time. America is an insular country. The only time an American who came visited India in the 19th century was Ulysses Grant, who was once the President of the United States and was the commander of the army of Lincoln against the South. As a general, he won the war, and later he became the President of the United States. So once he had retired in 1879, or I think around 1880, he visited India, spent time here for a month. And what he said is very significant. He said the British were doing a damn good job in India, and they were keeping hunger away from the people. It's a strange way of looking at things. And America at that time had little interest in India, no interest at all. It continued. President Roosevelt came in, the great American president. He died in 45 and 46. There's a gentleman, another ex-president, Mr. Wilson, he came to India also. And he also made some very foolish remarks in the sense that it's a good thing that the British are ruling India because they're keeping the hunger away from the people. I don't know how he reached this conclusion, but the net result, what I want to come to, is that the Americans are really not interested in India at all. Rather, they were not interested in the subcontinent at all. In 47, when India became free, the Americans were not really interested in India at all. But they were worried about China and the United States. China had become communist at that time, and Mao Zedong had won that great battle, the civil war against Chiang Kai-shek, and Chiang Kai-shek and his Katori had escaped to Formosa. Stalin was all in power in Russia, and the Americans were pretty scared, so they decided to float some defense pacts. So the first one pact they set up was the Baghdad Pact, and then they set up the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SATO. Baghdad Pact collapsed like a pack of cards. King Faisal was shot dead. The Prime Minister was lynched by the Iraqi crowds, and Baghdad Pact had vanished. But it was replaced by them with another pact called CENTOS. And at that time, around 1954, they offered to India and Pakistan, that time an independent country, to join up with them against communism. Nehru, the Indian Prime Minister, was a man who believed in neutralism. He didn't accept it. But Pakistan, which had an axe to grind against India, as they felt Kashmir was their birthright, they joined up with both the pacts. Now here, the Americans from now onwards began to differentiate between Pakistan and India. When the Indian Air Force needed a bomber, to replace the Liberator, which they didn't give any, thought about it. No weapons were supplied to India. The Indians expressed a desire for the British Lightning Mach 2 fighter. They didn't get that either. In contrast, they gave to Pakistan the F-104 Starfighter and also the Patton tanks. And they made a statement, well, these are not meant for India, they're meant for Russia. They knew very well that Pakistan is not going to fight Russia or China, and these weapons would be used against India, which they did in the 1965 war. And since Pakistan with the ally, the number of times they brought a resolution in the Security Council to get a plebiscite in Kashmir. And thanks to the Russians, it was vetoed every time. The Russian leader after Stalin was Nikita Khrushchev, and when he visited India, he had a rapport with the Indian Prime Minister. And when the British refused the Lightning, he said, okay, no problem, I'll give you the MiG-21. So India started getting into the Soviet sphere. It was not an ally, mind you, but they went in a pro-Soviet approach. While the Americans became more and more anti-India. And it reached the nadir when in the 1971 war, when the Indian army advancing by leaps and bounds into Bangladesh, President Richard Nixon ordered the 7th Fleet to move from the Eastern Pacific to the Bay of Bengal, establish a bridgehead in East Pakistan to help out the Pakistan army. Indira Gandhi was a little shrewd. Nixon didn't anticipate it, because in between she had signed up a defense pact with the Soviet Union, and that time Leonid Brezhnev, the president of the USSR at that time, came on the side of the Indians, and the Soviet nuclear fleet tacked on to the American 7th Fleet. The world was saved from further trouble and war because the Pakistan army collapsed like a pack of cards. All their generals who were having a jolly good time, they said bye-bye, goodbye, we surrender. And that was the end of Nixon as well. Nixon himself was, sent home after the Watergate scandal. He couldn't face up to the public, he was going to be impeached, and he had nothing to say except to go home and rest. From that time onwards, America tried to make amends to India because Bangladesh had been created. They realized that India is the dominant power in Southeast Asia, but always they favored Pakistan. That is why I think a few days back the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, made a statement that the Kashmir problem would have been solved long time back if the Americans had not been backing Pakistan. Very true. That is why, because the Americans were backing Pakistan, the Kashmir problem was never solved. Though the Americans were always saying, giving lip service, we are neutral, but there were so many groups. And in England, the Labour Party was going around saying that Kashmir is the unfinished agenda of partition and must go to Pakistan. So you can well imagine the situation India was in. At that time, there was no choice for India but to be closer to the USSR. Now, throughout this period, which I have been telling you, the Americans were never fully supportive of India at any stage. Unlike China. China, they pumped in billions of dollars and they made a fool of themselves because the Chinese took all the technology, everything, and then told them, look, we are equal to you. We don't recognize you as a great power. We are a great power ourselves. And now they are getting ready for an invasion of Taiwan and the Americans don't know what to do. Joe Biden, I'm afraid, is not the man to lead America at the moment, but sadly he is there in the chair, in the hot seat, and now he is making overtures to India. But at the same time, again, they are not treating India the way they should have. I'll give you an example. Recently, the Americans transferred nuclear technology of submarines to Australia as a counter to China. They haven't transferred anything to India. Though India is supposed to be part of the Quad, an alliance against China. So in a number of instances I've seen, the Americans believe in that famous novel by Rumer Gordon, thus far and no further. That means they go up to a point with India, they're not anti-India, they're not pro-India either. And they still harbor close association with Pakistan. I remember the previous chief of the Pakistan army who went to America was given a royal treatment like a president. And even now the American chiefs of staff have been talking of making amends with the Pakistan army. Forgetting the fact that they lost in Vietnam and they lost in Afghanistan basically because of Pakistan. Pakistan at that time was supporting the Haqqani faction, and this faction went around killing thousands of American soldiers, hundreds of them. I don't think it's gone into the American brain that if Pakistan had not been there, they would have won the war in Afghanistan. But what actually happened? They lost the war. And then there was what I call the mother of all retreats, when the American army just retreated lock, stock and barrel, left leaving everything behind, weapons, helicopters. Even their supporters were left behind, some of them, who were caught and shot dead by the Taliban. So you can well imagine what's happening. So my point is that now what's of the future? Now America is in trouble, it's making overtures to India, wanting India to join up against China. Why? Because India has got the manpower and the Americans don't have the manpower to oppose China. That is the crucial point. So Modi must be very careful not to play into the American trap. America is not going to support India in a war with China. And whatever the Americans say, they don't do. Just imagine, they were friends with Chiang Kai-shek. He's alive for 30 years. And then in 1972, they dropped him like a hot potato into the ocean. Bye-bye, General Chiang. We don't want to be with you. And poor General Chiang Kai-shek was left looking at the sky. He had run away to Taiwan. They've done it everywhere, something like that. The CIA brought the Shah into power in Iran. But after the Iranian Revolution, when the Shah ran away from Iran and wanted asylum in America, Jimmy Carter at that time was the president. He said, no, please don't come here, So that poor man had to go. He was an ally of the Americans for a good part of 25 years. And he had to go and die in Egypt. So one should be very clear. You can't really trust the Americans at all. They were always opposing China. Always. And then in 1972, Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger carried out a military coup, almost like a coup d'etat. What did they do? They went and made overtures to China, dropped the nationalists like a potato, and made friends with them. And when Nixon was in Beijing, the 7th Fleet was withdrawn from the Eastern Pacific. So India must be very, very careful not to be taken in by the Americans. And we must ensure, in fact, the Indian Prime Minister Modi is following the right track. We must ensure that we do not forsake Russia. Russia has been with us for 6 decades, ever since Nikita Khrushchev came to India in 1956, and now Vladimir Putin. They have given India the latest weaponry. That's 400, the Su-35, all the latest weapons, helicopters, the MiG-23, 27, 29. Americans gave us nothing, including the T-90 tanks now, which are with the Indian Army. So all this is very important, and we must bear in mind and see what are India's interests. Yes, we have a problem with China and we have to deal with it. But my view is that if you have friends with Russia and Russia is an ally of China, maybe Russia may be able to temper the Chinese down. But the Americans, if you go in with them, Russia will also be against you. And then you will be left isolated, because tomorrow the Americans will say, well, thank you, Mr. Modi, we have got some other things to do. So I come to the end of this short video. Don't trust the Americans. Play your cards properly. Use them. If they can use you, you can also use them. Our main danger would be China, and we'll have to face up to China's, if not today, tomorrow. If people will remember, the Chinese Institute of Strategic Studies had published a study a few years back in which they had said, India will break up into many countries because of the inherent contradictions in Hinduism. What are those contradictions? Language, caste, economic disparity. India has to get rid of these 3 things. It's not going to be easy, but we have to prove the Chinese wrong. And I wonder if India will be able to do it. If there's one man who can lead India forward, I think it's the present Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. He's the right man. Because all the grave digging which has been done earlier by the earlier leaders like Pandit Nehru and all these chaps, they've really put India down at the back, on the back burner. So somebody has to come out of the back burner now. It's not easy, as I said, it's not easy. You can't clean the audience tables, the audience tables of the gods. They couldn't clean it. It's very difficult to clean them. But there's always hope. At the same time, India has to be alone, build up its military power, and first of all, we'll have to sort out Pakistan and then get ready for China. I close now, gentlemen. I hope you like this video, my opinion. I've been to America. I've been studying the whole geopolitical situation very closely. I have some books written on the subject also. And I look forward to your subscribing to my video, sharing it with your friends. I close now and wish you all the best. Jai Hind, take care and God bless.